Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. We are so welcome. We are so excited to have you all here on a Tuesday night. We typically gather for We Review on Wednesday nights, but tonight is Tuesday night, and we know that many of you all, although you may not be traveling for Thanksgiving, some of you all start your cooking early on Wednesday night for Thanksgiving dinner, and so we decided to have Review tonight at 6:30 p.m. We're asking you, wherever you are watching from, to share this link. Share this link, share this stream on your pages. We are excited to have a very important conversation. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about where do we go from here. We've having critical conversations with different faith leaders, different civic leaders, and different activists. And so we are so excited tonight for our panel discussion. So I'm going to ask right before I bring them on, that you all will hit the share button. Let us know where you're watching from. Let us know where you are streaming from. We're asking you to get involved in the comment section as we begin this discussion tonight. First, I want to welcome a few of our distinguished individuals tonight. First, I want to welcome all the way from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He serves as a state representative in the city of Philadelphia. Representative Chris Rabb is here with us tonight. How you doing, Rabb?
I'm doing well, Pastor.
It's good to have you. I also want to welcome actually a member of the Mount Sinai Church and a member of the Princeton City Council, a member of the Princeton City Council, Brother Dwaine Williamson. What's going on, Dwaine?
I'm doing well, Pastor. How are you doing tonight?
Listen, it's good to see you, man.
It's good to be here.
Yes, sir.
I always love, just congregating with our church, and it's good to be here.
Yes, sir. And lastly, we have a young man who has worked on some campaigns. He is an alum. He's an alum of the CBC and he is also serves at the North Church in Philadelphia as the Religious Liberties Director, and that is Christopher Johnson. What's going on, Christopher Johnson?
Hey, Pastor. It's good to be here. So glad to be able to be part of this very critical conversation. To be able to share this panel with such a distinguished panel with Rep. Rabb and Council Member Williamson. So glad to have this conversation.
Yes, sir. Well, listen, I am excited to get right in as people are beginning to tune in and to stream with us tonight. Listen, we have a lot to discuss. We have a lot that's going on. And we'll just kind of start right here. This summer was what I would consider to be an inflection point, not only in this country, but in our community. We all saw the video of George Floyd being dying at under the knee of a police officer. We saw the stories of Breonna Taylor and others. We saw the story of Breonna Taylor and others. And what I want to talk about tonight, to start off, is this. There are a lot of people who are frustrated. There are a lot of people who went to the streets and they marched and they protested. What I want to throw out here, and I'm going to ask if you could start off for us, Representative Rabb. How do we take the protests that we saw this summer and turn them into real action? What are some of the options that some people who are watching, they may be saying, I'm frustrated by some of these images of police brutality and excessive force, but they may be saying, I'm just angry. I don't know what to do. Can you kind of help us? Can you kind of give some insight onto what is available to citizens and what we can be calling for and asking for?
Absolutely. It's a great question. I first want to root it in an appropriate context that a lot of people don't think about, which is, as bad as things are or have been in your life, what are the things that you prize? What are those things that give meaning to you? Things that beyond your doing, things that you benefit from. So whatever those things are in society that you like, that you want to keep and maybe expand, think about any number of things, no matter how small, and then ask yourself, how did that come to be? Did it just happen, or did people work towards getting it done? Right. So if you like the fact that you don't have to work in a building full of asbestos, right, then you can say, well, what was the process by which that happened, where I am free of that type of environment? Or it could be issues around health or education or anything. And then you have to say, well, if it didn't just happen, who made it happen? And if people made that happen back then to benefit you now, generations later, then that suggests that there's hope for you to improve on the things that you don't like, whether it's policing or it's environmental racism or it's sexism or whatever. These are things that just don't happen. We make happen. And they rarely happen by one politician, one political party, one election cycle, or even one generation. So from that perspective, I think it's really important to say, too, that I was reading earlier today, because I'm a family historian and genealogist, and I was reading about one of my favorite ancestors who was a native of New Jersey, Reverend Amos Noah Freeman, who was a radical Congregationalist minister and abolitionist. And he worked his entire life for the abolition of slavery, his entire life. And, you know, he didn't wait for one single president or one single church or one single anybody. It was a lifetime of struggle to make something happen to help other folks. And that's how we have to process it. And we can't put it on any one elected official or any one political party. We have to understand the systems that create the things that we love and the things that we hate. And we have to find that entry point that we are comfortable with to make a change, however small, because sometimes it's the smallest acts that could have the biggest ripple effects.
Oh, wow. I'm so glad that you said that there are systems that create what we love and systems that create what we hate. And I think that is really, really important. I'm going to ask if Councilman Williamson would hop in here.
Oh, absolutely. And Representative Rabb hit the nail on the head. And I'll say probably a lot of the same things, but in my own words. You know, in the Bible, it says, without vision, nation perishes, right? To me, everything starts with a vision. You got to have a vision of what you think the world should look like and what you think your world and your immediate community should look like. You know, you have to have philosophies in your life about what makes things good, right? Which is the meaning of the word of philosophy itself. It is the study of what is good. What makes things good, right? And in order, once you have that vision, you now have to bring that vision into fruition. You have to make it real, right? And so you have to know, just like Rabb said, you have to know how to make it real. What are the systems that makes it real? What should our government look like? You know, when we're born, a government exists already, right? And we are fortunate enough to live in a place where we have very strong systems, you know, democratic systems, et cetera. We know that these systems didn't always work equally well for everyone, but they do exist, right? And there's some good in there and there's some bad in there. For example, even though the Constitution came around in the 1780s, I think 1783 to be exact, when most of our people are still in slavery, I still think the concept is great of a document based on idealism, based on folks doing things better, based on things they learned in the past. Unfortunately, for many of us Black folks, it wasn't until Brown v. Board in 1953 and 1954 that we argued that under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution that it should work for all of us. And then later on in 1964, with the Civil Rights Act, Congress basically codified in law what came from the Supreme Court cases, and there were several of them. There were actually about 17 or 18 Brown v. Board cases, right? So the bottom line is the Constitution is a great document, is the foundation of how we live. All of our state laws for all 50 states, District of Columbia, and the U.S., the several U.S. territories are based on that. People have to learn how to get from where we are now to realizing that vision. And you do that by knowing all the different factors of things that make a society work. The first thing is the law. That's one of the reasons I became a lawyer, because I always wanted to know what the laws are. To me, those are the rules of the game. It's how it functions. There are other factors. If, for example, in our town, Trenton, I'm of course a councilman in Princeton, but I was great. I was, the Lord blessed me when I immigrated here with my family from Jamaica to grow up here in the city of Trenton. And I attended Trenton Public Schools, and I saw the good and the bad of Trenton. So even though I'm a councilman in Princeton, I care very much about Trenton. And truth to be told, I care primarily, I would almost say argue primarily about where Black folks are, no matter where we are, whether it's Trenton or elsewhere. And that's one of my primary concerns, right? So now it comes down to what is our vision for people of color and Black folks in particular, and how does that fit into the whole vision of what is for America? And so the next question then becomes, how do we realize that vision? And so the next part after that is we have to know facts. They said we're all entitled to our own opinions. We're not entitled to our own facts. So we got to know the facts. Where are we? What are the percentages? I'm a percentage type guy. I love percentages. I need to know the numeric. I have to know the factors, you know? So I start off, for example, that Trenton in the last census, 2010 census, had 84,913 citizens, right? 52% African-American. I like to know statistically where people are, where we are with education level. You know, how many of our people graduating have certain education attainment by a certain age, all those things. One of the things I do know, unfortunately, in Trenton, of the 565 municipalities in the 21 counties in New Jersey, Trenton, we're number 3 from the bottom as far as education attainment, right? I think only with Patterson and Camden are the only other 2 towns that are beneath us. And so there's and of course we know there's a direct connection between educational attainment and other things like unemployment, crime, all this other thing. Right? So to keep it focused, because I could go a million directions with this, is we always got to start with the vision. We got to have the knowledge to know what are the different systems and structures that we need to do to realize that vision. And then the last, I'll end this part by saying the root of this is education, right? It can't be, just try to get through school, maybe get your high school diploma, maybe you don't, and you go by your own common sense. No, we have to know how things work. You got to know exactly how the city is structured, know the different parts, know how the state is structured, know how funding happens, know when your taxes are paid, where the money goes. Not only that, know who the individuals are that make the decisions. When your kids go to school, know who makes the curriculum. Is this the best curriculum for my kids so my kids could be who I want them to be? Who is at the Department of Education? Who's making that decision? What's that guy and a woman's name? Where's their office in Trenton? What's their phone number? We've got to get involved like that. You know what I'm saying? And unfortunately, I know I said I'm going to end with that one, and I could be long-winded. I'll say this right here. The downside is a lot of where we're functioning today as a people, when I say as people, as African-Americans, and that's a whole other debate. I am African-American. People are like, Dwaine, you're really Caribbean-American, you're something else. I'm a black man, I'm a black African-American. Okay, my ancestors' ship stopped at a different port, but we're all this together. Anyway, one of the downsides with us is that when we came out of slavery and out of Jim Crow, white folks had created a lot of the systems. So too many of us got comfortable living in the systems they created, or even when we were uncomfortable, didn't know what to do next. Most of the times we're just from doing what to do next. But a lot of us got to the point where as long as we have a steady job and a pension coming, we just kind of let everything else go and we kind of deal with it. We have to get out of that. It's our world too. And we have to visualize what we want and figure out how to get there and get the education and the knowledge in order to get there.
Listen, I appreciate that, what you said about visualizing that what we want our world to look like. And both Representative Rabb and Councilman Williamson talked about that we too have a say in what our world can look like. That we know what we love, we know what we don't like. And it's so important that we know that for ourselves and that we begin to do the work to make that happen.
Right.
Mr. Johnson, Chris, my brother, you are the millennial in this discussion, and you represent a younger generation that is a little bit just sour to the process, sour to the system, and sour to the structures. And they're like, yeah, I'm envisioning beyond this. Could you speak to some of the frustrations of younger African Americans? And can you kind of speak to letting those who are watching know, like we talked about, what is accessible, what is available, what can we actually fight for?
Yes, well, thank you. You know, as the resident Black millennial on this panel, I do want to affirm some of the frustrations and criticisms that my generation has had or have shown recently in the wake of not only the George Floyd uprisings, but also people call us the Trayvon Martin generation. When we were the young kids who grew up in the generation where we were first privy to seeing, you know, young Black men gunned down by police officers, unarmed, and not seeing any justice happen as a result of it. And, you know, in previous generations, they had their own different struggles. Some of them looked like, you know, hangings and lynchings that took on because of, you know, inaccurate or unfair charges that were placed on Black men in the past. And, you know, this history and this legacy of racism has continued on, you know, throughout the years. And so hearing these stories and seeing that, you know, these same injustices are happening even today, even when under different faces, it's really frustrating. You know, we've seen, even during the civil rights movement, people taking to the streets and marching and calling for freedom, singing the freedom song, and, you know, going on throughout the 80s and 90s, and even to the moment where we were able to, you know, elect our first African-American president, where we thought that we would be on the path towards, you know, a new America, a brighter America, a more fair and just America. Even during his presidency, we still were able to see, you know, injustice resurface, but also, you know, there not being an opportunity for us to be able to see, you know, fairness actually happen in the justice system. And so that frustration lingers. And I think one of the things that we need to, you know, kind of focus on is, based on what Rabb said and the councilman said also, was persistence is key, right? And I think also it's about being very specific. Often we look at some of these big problems and we see them being like national problems, but also kind of like global anti-Black problems, and wanting to fight them full on, you know, all together. We got to figure out a way to like end racism today. We have to figure out a way to end police brutality today, all across the world. And while that is you know, that's the right idea, it's the noble idea, I think also it's more important to see, you know, to be where our feet are, to see what what work we can do locally. So this past summer, in the wake of the George Floyd uprising, you know, millions of people took to the streets all across the country, but particularly here in Philadelphia. I was actually one of those who, even during the pandemic, put on my mask, put on some sneakers, and marched downtown to make sure I was a part of letting our voices be heard. And one of the things that was so important was, and instead of just having, you know, marches and just yelling and, you know, kind of allowing our voices to be heard, people had to actually start to go to elected officials afterwards and bring demands to them with an agenda. And Rabb is actually saying yes, because he was one of the people who probably received some of those calls and requests from activists locally. And as a result of that, one of the things that people targeted, when I say being specific, was, listen, we gotta, you know, we were in the middle of a budget season here at the city council level here in Philadelphia. And one of the budget items was possibly, you know, giving $14 million extra dollars to the police department. And because of the voices of the people and because of folks who want to cry out and say, listen, they don't deserve that extra money, that $14 million was actually scrapped from the budget. Also at the state level, where Brad can probably talk to this a little bit better, but we also needed to find better ways to ensure that police officers can be held accountable. And so based on the activism of state lawmakers, including Rep. Rabb and a host of others who formed a working group, the Pennsylvania governor actually signed, I think it was House Bill 1841, which requires, that law enforcement officers, receive background checks, and the background checks will carry them through whatever, no matter the employment they receive in other jurisdictions, but also require mental health checks as well. And so those are just, they're not going to end police brutality altogether, but those are some of those small measurable steps that'll make it easier for us to get to the vision and get to the future that we want to see. But it's about being specific and being persistent, right? Going from marching on the streets, but then marching to Rep. Rabb's office or Councilman Williams' office and saying, hey, here's our demands, here's what we want to negotiate, and here's how we're going to hold you all accountable. And that's the work that has to continue to be done.
And that's exactly what Christopher did. And thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of millennials, Black folk, and other folks across the country and across the globe. In fact, in the state, there were Black Lives Matter protests in rural counties. When you looked at the map, and I forget which publication put it out, they put dots on all the places where there were rallies, pro-BLM rallies, and it was amazing. It was not just in city centers, but at the front of this mass mobilization was folks like Christopher. And those of us who were in the halls of power, we listened. Some of us, listened intently and participated. Others reacted because they didn't want to be rallied against, right? And then a small group of us shut down the House of Representatives for the first time in 244 years. It's never been shut down. We shut it down. We said, we're not going to let you start legislative session until you put police accountability as priority one. We have bills that have not been heard. And here's the thing. There were bills that came up that had never been addressed. There has never been a true police accountability bill that was enacted into law. And policing was essentially invented in Pennsylvania. The prototype for policing as we know it in the country started in 1700 in Philadelphia. So we had a 320-year institution that had never had any meaningful accountability or transparency ever. And within 36 days, millennials like your brother and many others were able to get 3 democratic bills enacted into law. And that was unheard of. But here's the thing. If people on the street who don't vote or who are not allowed to vote or not old enough to vote, who are disaffected, if they don't know of their power, they didn't know that the protests that they participated in resulted in that because they don't read the papers. They're not reading the certain types of things, and they've left that power on the table. And it has to be the responsibility, not just of the press, not just of the clergy, not just of elected officials, but everyone has to be responsible for saying, this is how the dots are connected. What people did, what poor folk did, unemployed folks, returning citizens did, had a meaningful impact on the type of legislation that changes lives. And it's just the beginning. It's not the end. It's just the beginning. So if there's an institution that's 320 years old in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that had never seriously been addressed, never, not during the Civil Rights era, not during the New Deal, not during Reconstruction, like at any point in the past. And in 36 days, 3 bills get enacted into law in a legislature dominated by right-wing Republicans. If that doesn't show the power of young people and protest, nothing will. But we have to tell that story. If a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, doesn't make a sound. So it's all of our responsibility, and which is why whenever I speak, I never take the credit. Never, never, never. I thank the folks who are on the front lines, because I wasn't on the front lines. I was on the sidelines listening to people speaking, right? And then lifting up what they're saying. I'm amplifying their concerns. I'm listening to their recommendations, and that informs public policy, which means that that's how good legislation is forwarded and ultimately enacted into law. So all of us who are in positions of power have to give credit where credit is due, because all of those disaffected people who say, oh, the politicians don't listen, here's a perfect example of when we do. We don't listen enough and in the right ways and consistently, but when we do, we can make real change. And the real leaders are the people who are on the front lines in the streets, but that's not where it starts and stops. It's a continuous thing. The most important thing is what happens in between the election cycles, not just leading up to election day, but between the election cycles, and know who is responsible for what. If you have a problem with me about zoning, I can't help you. I'm a state lawmaker. I have no authority and no funding to address those issues. You need to talk to city council. If you want to deal with things on the state level, you deal with me, and on the federal level, you deal with your congressperson or you a senator. So we have to have a level of civic literacy that we're not going to get in the traditional classrooms. And we've always taught ourselves as Black folk. We taught ourselves how to read and write when it was illegal to do so. Education is the most powerful thing, but education starts long before you get into kindergarten and long after you get out of class. It happens at home. It happens in our churches. It happens in our mosques. It happens wherever we make it happen, because otherwise we're not going to get the full education that we need and deserve to liberate ourselves meaningfully.
Oh my goodness. I mean, listen, I almost forgot that I was hosting. I'm sitting back here ready to pull out a notepad and paper. For those who are watching, listen, I know this y'all are enjoying this. And there's just two things that were said in our last segment that were just so important. First of all, talking about understanding that meaningful change starts in the streets, that it was people who were just regular people, college students, working class people, poor people who used their feet and their voice and forced those who either wanted to listen or didn't want to listen and to do something. And you talked about giving up, and you all three talked about giving up your power. How we give up our power. And I think that is so important for those who are watching to be careful not to give up your power. Your voice is meaningful. Your march is meaningful. Your vote is meaningful. Use the power that you have. And can we talk a little bit more about the need for civic literacy? Right. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And then I'm going to ask Brother Williamson to hop in after. Can you talk more about, for those who are watching, they say, what do you mean by civic literacy? What do you mean?
How society functions. How does the world we live in, and specifically our city, if we live in a city or a suburb, township, borough, what have you, our state and our nation, right? We have different levels of government. So we have local, we have county, we have state, and we have federal. So that's 4 levels right there. But then you also have the independent, we call that the public sector, right? So we're talking about government. That's the public sector. Then we have the independent sector. The independent sector are nonprofits, foundations, et cetera. These are tax exempt entities. They could be churches or mosques. They could be United Way or Boy Scouts, what have you. So you have the charities, nonprofits, et cetera. Then you have the private sector. Now that's business. 50% of people who are in the workforce work for the private sector. 50% work for the public sector. So they work for federal government. Why is that important? And state government. Why is that important to Black folk? Well, before the 60s, our government would not hire Black folk meaningfully. Why did all of a sudden Black folk get all these civil service jobs in the 60s? Might have been because we were blowing stuff up. Yes. we scared white folk. We were quote unquote rioting. We had rebellions like we did, like our ancestors, when we fought against slavery, right? It was the same type of thing. And white folk in power were afraid that Black folk would burn everything down. So Richard Nixon, not a liberal, said, we need to provide more opportunities for upward mobility for Black folk. We need them to get into business. We need them to have good government jobs, and maybe they'll stop being so mad at us. Well, we didn't stop being mad, but we took those jobs and it helped build the transgenerational middle class that exists today. A lot of folks love to talk about Black folk are in poverty, but just as many folks who are middle class. Now, they're not as wealthy as their white middle class counterparts. We don't have the same household wealth. But in terms of occupational advancement, attainment, and such, there is a sizable Black middle class that came from protest. So we have the public sector, private sector, independent sector, and then we have something called the fourth estate. The fourth estate is the media and the free press. So,
brother,
holding democratic institutions accountable. The fourth estate is our free press. They are supported. Journalism is supported in our Constitution, as is lobbying. And the lobbyists they protected in our Constitution are we the people, private citizens who are lobbying folks in government like me. So when folks were out in the street and say, I want to make sure Rep. Rabb does the right thing, that's their constitutional right to demand redress of government. So this is how it all works. So when we talk about civic literacy, where do you fit in terms of public, private, and independent sectors? Where is your understanding also of media literacy? When you watch Fox News and you believe that stuff on Fox News, but you don't believe what's going on in the Black press, or you don't know that there's an independent press, that there's Black-owned radios, that you can get different information from different sources and figure out what's legitimate and what is shady. Having media literacy is part of civic literacy, and we can't be good citizens. We can't be effective members of the Black community. We can't be effective as parents, as employers, as anyone without having that level of civic literacy. And it's our responsibility to learn ourselves, but it's also the responsibility of folks in positions of power like me and Councilman Williamson to make it plain, Let me just end with this because you get me all excited. Here's the thing. When I say to someone, why don't you vote? And, this is important. You need to vote and stuff. And I haven't explained first. I haven't even asked that person, what do you care about? What do you value as a daddy, as a son, as someone from West Philly or North Philly or wherever? What do you care about? And how do you envision your community being strengthened? And what do you think hurts that vision? If I don't entertain or start or cultivate a conversation like that, I'm part of the problem, because only in understanding their answers to those questions can I then say, well, let me tell you how me, Rep. Rabb, as a state lawmaker, positively or negatively impacts your vision for your community. If I can't connect the dots as a public servant, I'm part of the problem. And not enough public servants of any background take the time to listen and create a narrative that draws people in, particularly those folks on the margins who didn't even vote in the most important election that we just had. They didn't vote. So we can blame them and say, oh my gosh, they're apathetic, they're stupid, they're this or that. No, that means I haven't done my job. That means as good as I'm doing, I need to do so much better. I want to meet those folks. I want to engage them and ask them those questions. And you know what? I shouldn't be surprised by their answers.
Well said. Well said, Brett.
Councilman Williamson, listen, talk about people who are saying, one of the groups that we have seen, I've seen and just talked to, are young men for some reason. It does seem that we have a lot. This week we're talking with three Black men, and there are a lot of Black men who feel and will express a sense of disillusionment with the entire process, just a general frustration, a general fatigue. You're from Trenton. What have you experienced in terms of what you've heard from brothers in terms of their frustration with the voting and their frustration with government and their frustration with politics? And can you speak specifically to the frustration that brothers have who may be watching tonight?
Sure. What I've come to realize, certain things I grew up with that I'm not going to say I thought was a curse, but I thought were pretty bad. I later on in life realized that they were blessings. And let me tell you what I mean, and it answers your question. Pastor. I grew up in poverty. I grew up, we came from Jamaica, where when I was a kid, I had no indoor plumbing. We had an outhouse. I had to go get the morning's water and all that, for bathing and whatever else we did. Then after a stopover elsewhere, we came to Trenton, right? So we all lived in my uncle's house, who was my uncle and my aunt. They were like the pioneers who came here first. So we lived in their house. So we had a bunch of heads, bunch of extended family in a house, Vine Street, right off Martin Luther King Boulevard, with 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. Slept in the back room with my brother. We came with my 4 older brothers, right? Cousins, all that. And the good part about it is that when I got to know my American counterparts, who weren't very welcome for a large part when we first got here, there was a lot of fighting. Because a lot of the young brothers and stuff from the streets, so to speak, saw these newcomers. And by that, Jamaicans weren't popular yet. This was the late 70s. And so there's a lot of fighting and stuff like that. But what I learned from growing up in that community, and I went to Jefferson Elementary School, named after a slave trader, which I later on said, in a city that's predominantly Black, and we still got schools named after people who own slaves. That tells you something about the consciousness of the community, right? Later on, went to Junior 1. Out of all the middle schools in Trenton, the one school that had a name was the predominantly white one, the last predominantly white remaining one. And all the other ones, ours was just Junior 1. Later on, when they renamed Princeton Avenue, that part of Princeton Avenue, Martin Luther King Boulevard, they renamed my middle school Martin Luther King Middle School. Then I graduated from Trenton High, good old Trenton High, which is also the alma mater of the late David Dinkins, who passed away today, right? So what I learned, that frustration of which you speak, Pastor, I've been seeing it my entire life, and what that frustration, I think what it boils down to is we all want to live a good life, however we envision that, but then we get conditioned to understand whatever that life should be. Some of the conditioning is positive, some is negative. I grew up in Mount Sinai Adventist Church. Helped me build, helped me with my character and stuff like that. So part of my vision is a society that's morally good, right? And in addition, everyone wants to be comfortable. People want to own their own homes, etc. Unfortunately, you also have a lot of negativity out there. You have what I call what some people call the entertainment industry. I call it the alternative education industry. So you have folks who are already vulnerable, who unfortunately and let me speak specifically to the city of Trenton. And I think Trenton could be the epitome of what's happening in all of America's, what I call cities that have a large Black population. Whether it's Chicago, which has the largest, whether it's Detroit, whatever. A lot of it is the same story. So Trenton is a post-industrial city where industry was big and industry moved on outside the country, and is a post-migration town, right? And so a lot of what we see comes from, we are the results of that history. As Shakespeare said, the past is prologue, which means the past is the prologue to where we are now. We're a result of that history. And what Trenton is in particular, in a nutshell, is before the 1920s and 30s, Trenton hardly had any Black folk. There was a handful of Black folks who also were mixed with Native Americans and stuff like that, et cetera. Most of the Black folks in Trenton came here, people say for jobs, but most people don't really understand what the real issue was. What the real issue was that the white population in Trenton and the poor people in Trenton at the time, in the 20s and 30s, you're talking about 90 to 100 years ago, were Italian Americans. The Roebling Works here was the largest employer in Trenton. When Italian Americans started unionizing, et cetera, and demanding better labor conditions, Roebling's and his business cohort they said, wait a minute, why should I pay you whatever they wanted at the time, $1 an hour and weekends off, whatever they wanted, the new unions wanted. They said, we have all these Black people who are called sharecroppers who just came out of slavery in the South. And they're working on the same plantations where 3 generations before the ancestors were in slavery. So Roebling and his folks in Trenton and the other business leaders intentionally went down to the South and started recruiting Black folks off these same plantations, and in Trenton, they specifically went to South Carolina, mainly. That's why so many Black Trentonians are descendants of Dillon, South Carolina, Marion, South Carolina, Sumter. It's not by chance. It's not by chance. the white boys, the white business owners went down there intentionally to help break the unions and growing labor movement up here in the North. And then in the South, remember, black folks at the time would be treated like garbage. I mean, they really were trying to kill us down here. The Civil War just ended in 1865, right? When the Union soldiers moved back north and no longer occupied the South, the Southern whites took revenge on us, whether it was Colonel Forrester started the Ku Klux Klan, etc. And they started, all the black codes and these different laws to keep black people, post-slavery black people suppressed. They came up with all the different concepts to take advantage of that loophole in the 13th Amendment, where they could, put us, basically criminalize us, particularly our men, vagrancy act, all that stuff. So from that, these white boys now started pulling black folks up. Most of the black folks didn't leave. A lot of black, because it's like better the devil you know than the devil you don't know, right? So when you know what to expect here, you know what I mean? You don't get treated well, but you know what to expect. You don't know what to expect when you go out on the roads, especially if they're trying to kill you for migrating, you know what I mean? And thinking you're being uppity or trying to arrest you for vagrancy. But these white boys up here literally went down there to try to pull black folks up, not because they loved us, they're just trying to get cheaper labor. By the way, they did the same okie doke on the next generation of folks here. Or the folks who were born up here, starting in the 20s, 30s, etc., when they started saying, can I get weekends off and benefits? The same white boys, the next generation of white boys said to them? Y'all ever heard of Chinese people? You ever heard of Malaysians? You ever heard of Mexicans? And they said, okay, why should I pay you all this money and give you these benefits and worry about ocean and all this stuff when I could shut down these factories, move them down to Mexico first and then out to China and Malaysia and get the same cheap labor on those ships that come into the seaport in Elizabeth or down in Philly or Baltimore and bring the same goods back, right? So that's what happened to our people. But unfortunately, when they came up here, a lot of them took advantage of the new opportunities that came up in the North, right? And also the changing circumstances of Brown v. Board, et cetera. Black kids could go to school, they could integrate school, et cetera. Unfortunately, there was that long history and culture of education among a lot of us. As I think someone said earlier about it was illegal for us to learn how to read, right? On top of that, we were taught a lot of very negative things, right? And some of them are so disgusting, they're not even in the movies anymore. Django Unchained was one of the few movies that touched on one subject, right? Where they showed the two brothers fighting each other to death while Master's sitting with his whiskey and his cigar, which was a regular thing in the South, And so a brother to know how to fight was way more important than to be educated. And if he could kill another brother and his master won some money on the bet, you know how he was rewarded? He got to sleep with the other sisters on the plantation at will, basically rape them. And the master's glad if they get pregnant because his genetics going to get other big dudes that he can either put out in the field. You know what I'm saying? So how does that affect us here? I know it's a long history. How does it affect us here? A lot of our people today in Trenton, most of them are ancestors from South Carolina. Many of our people, a lot of them did take advantage of the new opportunities. A lot of them got so used to the status quo, they just brought the status quo from the agrarian fields of the South to being packed up on Martin Luther King Boulevard or Walnut Avenue or Stuyvesant. So when those jobs started leaving in the 60s and stuff, right, a lot of us weren't sure what to do. We didn't have the education level, so we didn't have the flexibility to do different things, right? On top of that, you had the 60s counterculture, the negative sides of it. And on top of that, you had other people figure out they could take advantage of us. So you start rapping, telling you how great it is for black kids to shoot each other, how fun it is, and driving your Lamborghini with your Glock as you kill other black people. Okay? Yeah. And then so young people struggling with all these different things that's more important to get $300 Nikes than whatever. So a lot of us took advantage of the good stuff. A lot of us were already vulnerable because of the history of lack of education and stuff. So other people took advantage of us. You see what I'm saying?
It seems like we're speaking to the systemic nature of racism.
Exactly.
Racism is not just, and I think a lot of brothers need to understand this, and I thank you for that, Councilman Williams. I'm gonna come to you one second, Christopher. I think a lot of brothers need to understand that racism is systemic, that it impacts and touches economies, it touches housing, it impacts education, it impacts jobs. Johnson, Chris, one second. I'm gonna go to Christopher real quick.
Sure.
Chris, you're a young person, and you engage young Black men all the time. You talk to them. I'm sure you understand them. How, from your vantage point as a millennial, what have you heard? What are some of the frustrations that you've heard? And what would you say? This is something Rabb, Councilman Williamson, whoever's watching, whoever's in a position of authority or of affluence or influence really. This is what you need to hear. This is what our young men want. What would you say, Chris?
So this is a good question because I can answer it in kind of like two different hats, right? So as me, Christopher, having spoken to friends or at the barbershop with, folks who are there and talking about this election and politics in general, you generally hear just a very negative tone related to their views on our leaders and what government has or hasn't been doing to serve us. If you look at this 2020 year, there are 250,000 people who have died as a result of COVID-19. At the federal level, there's only been one stimulus bill that was passed, $3 trillion stimulus bill. One installment of $1,200 that went out to families to serve people, as well as, some funding for unemployment and for businesses and things like that. But largely, there are people who felt like they've had to fend for themselves, not only in 2020, but for most of their lives because of, this systematic failures, not only by the government, but just by, society at large. And so there's a lot of just frustration, distrust of the system, distrust of politicians who often, preach promises, but, fail to deliver in the way that they see meaningful. And so I think we have to acknowledge, that frustration and acknowledge people based on the history that we've seen, and also based on the history that Councilman Williamson just, spelled out for us, this history of systemic racism, systemic injustice that have, plagued our people and continue to do so. But I think also, in my organizing hat, when we try to get people back into the political process, often it's about waiting every 4 years or even during a midterm election to talk to people on the street and say, hey, are you registered to vote? Oh, you're not? Okay, let's get registered. I need you to vote in this upcoming election, blah, 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 right? As opposed to saying, kind of like what Rabb was alluding to earlier, as opposed to just saying, hey, register to vote, we can ask people as organizers and as people who are on the ground trying to get people involved in this space of politics and in government. What are some of the problems that you see in your community, right? What are things that you would like to see different? How would you like to reimagine this world? We never really think about asking that question. I like to do a little bit of like American Revolutionary history. And Thomas Paine once had this one quote where he said he was looking at America getting ready to draft the Declaration of Independence, and he was reading the document and he was looking over, this new change that we were about to embark on. And he said, we have it in our power to begin the world over again. And that quote is about reimagining what the world can look like. And how often are we able to actually portray that sort of sense to Black men? When I work in Southwest Philly and West Philly, where unfortunately a lot of young Black men my age or even younger have been succumbed to gun violence, whether they've known someone who's been shot or have been shot themselves, or know family members who have lost their lives. And we have a hopelessness issue because of this. We have a hopelessness issue because of food insecurity, lack of education, defunding education that has been taken on throughout generations and upon generations. And so we have to find a way to involve people back into this process by asking them, how would you like to see this world look differently? And whether your world is, broader and big, or also just in your community, what does that look like? And then bringing them in there, because you actually will be surprised by what people have to say. It may say, listen, I want to see a world that no matter what school you go to, whether it's private or public, all schools, the quality looks the same. I want to live in a world where, no matter my skin color, I know that I can get a high-paying job or a well-paying job, no matter what world, no matter my skin color or my age or whatever it may be, whatever the differences I have, I don't have to worry about being stopped by a police officer and possibly losing my life, or having been thrown in jail for, for years because I had, low-level drugs on me or whatever it may be. You'd be surprised by the imagination that people have, but we have to tap into that imagination. And tapping into that does not say just, hey, you have an election coming up on November 3rd, make sure you vote, get registered. No, it looks like involving people in the process of reimagining what the world will look like and actually listening to people. And I think that's where we have to start. That's my instruction for people who are organizers, folks who are in position of power and leadership, so that we can start together seeing a different world, one that is more just and more fair.
If I can, I'll be less long-winded than I was before. Just that was a lot of information. I was trying to figure out the most concise way to do it. But following up on what Brother Johnson just said, and when he said reimagining, I think is probably synonymous to what I meant by vision earlier, right? And I think once we get that we imagine this or have this vision, the next thing we need to do is and Brother Johnson and Rabb kind of alluded to the same thing or said it explicitly earlier, is to be very specific about it, right? So I think once we get the vision, we have to set very specific goals of what we want to achieve. We learn what these goals are. Brother Johnson just touched on that when he says asking people, meeting people where they are, asking them what they want. What you find out from my experience from doing this is most people have the same general goals, right? And we need to make them very specific. And one of my goals, something I'm working on right now, which kind of fits that, is I'm actually creating a 501c4 right now, a social organization, which is, sort of like a 501c3, but this is more, I guess you could call it a political organization, right? And mine is basically to get certain specific, and it's actually for focused on Trenton, believe it or not, even though I'm a representative in Princeton, it's focused on Trenton and is setting about 5 very specific goals for Trenton. And so I'm narrowing it down to 5 areas that I think from the folks I've talked to, what Trenton needs and what I think people want, and they one part is like educational attainment. One part is access to capital. One part deals with education attainment part. Also, there's a part that deals with curriculum, what our kids are learning in school, and they're different pieces. One part deals with housing, and one part deals with job creation, and a lot of them tying together. In fact, the education attainment and the housing part are tying together because I think one of the keys for our communities, and then one part is also dealing with understanding systems and politics, like Rabb was talking about, right? And I'll end this part by saying I represented a well-known brother in Trenton who's a brother who is a big advocate for reentry. He had served time in prison for selling drugs, served years in prison. I don't know if you know Brother Tracy Syfax by any chance, right? And he also owns one of the largest businesses in Trenton, right? A construction business. Because after he came out of prison, he goes out of his way to talk about basically helping with reentry, and he's atoned for his sins, so to speak, right? And the brother sent me down to he hired me to go to the zoning board, get a variance, right? So I walk into Trenton's zoning board meeting. Remember, Trenton is 52% African American. I think there are about 9 members, I think is what the ordinance says has to be on the zoning board. I'm not sure about that. Had the attorney, etc. I walk into this room and I saw all these white folks, right? And I saw 2 black people on the dais and a bunch of white folks. And I said, wait a minute. I walked back out and I made a joke. I said, oh, I thought I was in Trenton. Okay, I came back in. So here on the zoning board for the city of Trenton, there were 2 black people, and the town is 52% African American. I said, wow, look at this, right? And when we try to get this variance, they started using the word renters. We don't want renters in our neighborhood. Renters bring the neighborhood down. Once they move into town, it goes down. And for a while there, I wasn't sure if renters was synonymous with the N-word, because the way they were using it. Those renters, as soon as they come in, how things start looking. And 6 or 7 witnesses came up to argue against this, and only 1 was black. Bottom line is, that's just one example of how, if we don't understand how things work, We don't know what the different boards are. I mean, something as simple as knowing what the different boards are in your town, why they're important. Other folks take these positions, they create the world in their image and act like we're just supposed to live in it. And a lot of the frustration we face comes from lack of understanding of how things work, because we don't have that in our history. Mommy and daddy didn't come home and talk about zoning boards and planning boards and what does that mean for the town, you know? And most they came home and say, man, we got to pay this electric bill and you need to get a job, you know. And then on top of that, we're so exposed to very few jobs. For example, in the spectrum of careers, there are probably thousands. In our communities, people don't take like 30 jobs, literally. I mean, if you count the number of actual jobs, it's general categorization. Oh, I got a state clerk job, whatever, you know, there's a general categorization, right? Or even other jobs, lawyer, doctor, fireman, police, they count about 30. We have all these products we use in everyday life, but yet we go to the school, yet kids in school are saying, I'm not gonna use this stuff in everyday life because we're not becoming all the different engineers, materials engineers, all those stuff we need. We got a bunch of houses boarded up on Walnut Avenue, on Martin Luther King Boulevard, et cetera, right? But yet we say we don't have jobs. But then we talk to a lot of our young people, they don't have any skill. Many of them don't have the skills to either become the carpentry skills or whatever at vocational school, or have the information, the knowledge that maybe we could do an LLC and we all chip in some money together. We buy that house under the LLC and we repair this house. Now we have a house to live in and jobs. You know, I don't want to monopolize the conversation because I could go on forever with this. But the frustrations come from lack of knowledge is the root. Lack of knowledge. Lack of knowledge.
Yeah. Lack of knowledge. And I think that is so important as we're coming to an end of our discussion. We're up at an hour and I feel like this thing just zoomed by. I want to kind of close with this, and I want each of you to succinctly kind of to speak to this idea. Many people might be saying, listen, I learned a lot. There's a lot of information. I didn't even know how civically illiterate I was. You know, they're like, but a lot of people this summer were energized, and a lot of people this fall with the past election were energized. And a lot of people are asking, you know, the election is over, the summer is ending. You know, we're not seeing as many Black Lives Matter commercials, and we're not. We might not hear. There's no more commercials on the television, campaign commercials on TV, and they might be saying, "But I got energized, I got involved," and they might be saying, if you were giving me one thing to do next, what do I do next with this energy? What do I do next with this fire? What is something tangible and practical that I as a citizen can do next? I want you guys to answer that question. If you're watching today, you may be saying, listen, what can I do now? There's no election tomorrow. I mean, I guess I could go protest. I guess I could do, but what can I do now? For my community, what can I do now? What can I do next? Where do we go from here with this energy? I'm going to ask if Johnson, if you can go first, Williamson, if you can go second, and Rabb, if you can go last. All right, what can we do next?
Well, what's exciting is we can say the work actually starts now. All right, now the election season's out. We have all of the campaign commercials out the way, and the yard signs are starting to fade away and everything like that. Now we can actually get into the work of, you know, changing our country, changing our cities and the states in the way that we want to see them. And the way we can do that is by getting involved, right? And as I said earlier, it's about starting, whether small or being specific, finding something that matters to you. I think it was in the words of the late Elijah Cummings. He had these 3 words, started with the words P. Pain, what is it? Pain, passion, and purpose. Pain, passion, and purpose. He said, identify the thing that pains you, the thing that you see, whether you're walking down the street, that bothers you, that shakes you, that brings out an emotional, you know, pull towards you. For that will help inform what is your passion. You know, when something that pains you and you get passionate about it, that's your passion. And from there, whether you take that passion and use it for good by whether joining an organization, local organization in your area, an RCO to determine, development opportunities in your area, or if you want to join, a friends community with a friends community for your local school that's up the street of yours, or whatever it may be, get involved. Identifying the thing that pains you, for that will inform your passion, and it'll ultimately lead you to your purpose. Your purpose being the thing that'll help make a difference. Thing you can look back and have a legacy and say, hey, here's how I made a difference, whether it was small or big. Pain, passion, for it'll inform your purpose. But you have to get involved, whether small or big. Get involved and use those 3 words in order to help navigate what you can do going forward.
Awesome. Councilman Williamson.
All right, I boil it down to 3 things. The first thing is find out when your town, and if you're here in Trenton, when the City Hall has its meetings, and attend the meetings. Find out what your leaders are talking about. And in their dialogue, you learn, where they're spending your tax money. And where people spend money is where you learn what's important to them. The same way in our individual lives is the same way it is with the government. Number 2, I would say go to the school board meetings, and particularly if you have children in the schools. And same thing, just like with going to the City Hall meetings, your city council meetings, which I mentioned in the first part, is go to your school board meetings, right? And then going to Brother Johnson, what he said was just amazing. When you find that pain and passion in those meetings, speak up. You don't have to be the most eloquent person, whatever, but say what's in your heart. If something's troubling your child at home and they're at school, or troubling your child at school, that's the thing you talk about. How do I fix that? Number 3 is vote. Just always vote, And I'm not just saying this, or maybe I am because I'm a Democratic Party elected official, but if you ain't sure to vote for, vote Democrat, But find out, I'll be a little more serious in that sense, but find out what the people who are running for office believe in. Find out what their platform is. Does their platform fit? And I'm going to allude back to Brother Johnson again about the pain, passion, the purpose. Does that platform fit that? And in fact, if it doesn't fit that, you can call the office and say, hey, this is my pain, passion, and purpose. Can you add this to your platform? Okay? That's it.
Yes, sir. And Rabb.
All right. So we're doing 3. So I just came up with this. So 1, educate yourself. This goes back to the civic literacy point I made. It is not only okay, it is appropriate to not know something. All right. My grandfather used to say, it's okay being ignorant. It's not okay staying ignorant. So what questions do you want answered that relate to things you care about most? And do not assume that you're a dummy because you don't know the answer. I don't know how many people have come up to me and said, oh, I'm supposed to know all of this, and I'm supposed to know who's on the ballot and this judge and that. So no, we're all complicit in our mass ignorance, right? So educate yourself. What are the things you really want to learn about related to things you deeply care about? 2 is engage, get out of your comfort zone, right? You got to stop dealing with the same folks you used to deal with that haven't helped you out, right? Go outside of your comfort zone, go to a meeting, go to something that you normally wouldn't consider, because you might just learn something and meet other people. And the 3rd piece is, and this is the hardest, and I think this is an article of faith. So I'm going to leave you, Pastor, to maybe add to this at a later point. But how do we embody the values we claim to hold? If we're pointing our finger at someone else, that means that there's 3 fingers pointing back at us, right? All our feet are made of clay. We are all flawed human beings. We're here because of the grace of God, and we seek to improve ourselves and honor our Maker. And we have to have the vulnerability and the humility to understand that we're not perfect, but we cannot be talking about everybody else and what they don't do, and black folk don't do this, and politicians don't do this, and Biden won't do that. What are we doing? How are we making ourselves part of the solution? How are we working with other people? Because ultimately, nothing meaningful happens alone. We have to do this together. We descend from people who chose to survive. We have exported some of the most powerful assets around the world. Our culture, which white folk have been telling us for generations is inferior, and yet everyone's trying to be black. We have to accept our collective greatness and use it not to blow up our egos, but to build the type of beloved community that we all deserve.
Amen.
Man, listen, I just learned so much tonight, and I'm sure that the Mount Sinai community and those who have joined us on Facebook and on YouTube have just learned so much. If I were to sum up this conversation, I would say, everybody, let's take our power back. Let's take our power back. We have power. We have autonomy. We have agency, and these brothers tonight gave us basically like a race. They let the gun go off, and we're ready to run on with the power that we have to create and to imagine, as Christopher said, a more just and a more fair society. I thank everybody. I know y'all, we're virtual. We're not having an in-person panel in our building. So I'm asking everybody, wherever you're watching, to please give our panelists and our guests a round of applause. We thank you all so much. We thank you all so much for sharing with us tonight. We thank you all so much for sharing with us tonight. Did you all enjoy our panel this evening? Did you all enjoy our discussion this evening? Next week, tonight we had all men, all brothers, all black men on our discussion. Next week, we'll have our sisters will be on our discussion panel next week, and I'm looking forward. I am looking forward to that conversation. Listen, you all. Last week we had faith leaders. This week we have public servants, and we have organizers. And then next week we have those working in other fields. And I'm not even going to tell you who it's going to be. You got to wait till the flyer comes out to find out. But listen, we are doing this series for one thing. We are not just called to preach. We are not just called to sing. We are not just called to talk about the good things the Lord has done, but we are also called to do the work of Jesus, and that is to do justice and love mercy and care for the least of these. And so we want you all to know that you have power, that you have authority, you have agency to get involved. Imagine what you want your community to look like, and let's go for it. Let's fight for it. Listen, I thank you all for joining in tonight for review. We got on a little bit early Tuesday night instead of Wednesday night because some of y'all have a turkey to put in the oven. Amen. And so we're asking you all to have a safe holiday. Remember, guys, and I say this as your pastor from the bottom of my heart, please be safe during this Thanksgiving holiday. Please continue to practice social distancing. Cases of this virus are increasing. We are seeing uncontrolled spread around the country. And someone said it's better to have a socially distanced Thanksgiving than a Christmas in the ICU. And that is not a joke. That is something very serious. And so we're asking you all to be safe and be vigilant during this week. Listen, I want to pray for you all before we go. I hope that you'll have a good week. Father, we thank you for this discussion tonight. We thank you for this time together. Father, we ask that you would not let this be a moment of information, but let this begin a movement within us. Father, help us to ask, what can we do to change our community, to change our country, and to change our world? We thank you for this time together. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen, everybody. You all take care.